Welcome on in, golf fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with our round one prop preview for the Valspar Championship. Gonna break down what to expect from the Innisbrook Copperhead course and get you ready to fire on some of your exposure over there on Prize Picks Underdog, whatever prop sites that you guys are entering on, and get ready to hopefully have yourself a Thursday. We'll go through some of the averages at this course, of course a weather report over there for Thursday, how that'll impact some of the play, and then afterwards a few props over there on Underdog Fantasy and Prize Picks. And I'm getting to myself that you can either tail, fade, whatever you want to do with that, but more importantly to give you some perspective on how I'm approaching this kind of prop board. So we'll go ahead and start off with a look at the golf course over here on Bet the Number, where we got some of the averages over the last 3 years. Something worth noting is that the rough last year was significantly longer than what we've had in the past, and the averages last year reflect that. So though some of these averages are all worse than your tour average, whether it's FIR, right, fairways and regulation out there, greens regulation lower than what you're used to seeing, birdies lower, bogeys higher, right? No matter what you look at, it's pretty much all more difficult. If we look at just 2023, right, so we go over here and deselect 2021 and 2022, you'll see that the averages get even worse, right? Your fairway rate goes down, your green regulation rate goes down significantly over there from year to year. Scrambling percentage harder, birdies per round lower than 3 per round. Everything was extremely difficult last year. Partially why we had only a 10 under par winner. A lot of your guys up here, like a Wyndham Clark who finished in 5th, were like 4 or 5 under par. And essentially, if you broke par over the 72-hole event, you ended up finishing in the top 15 of the event. So it was extremely difficult scoring last year. And though it's maybe a little bit softer here in 2024, that rough is going to be longer, and we're going to have to use the stats from 2023 a little bit more than some of the previous years before that. So it's going to be a little bit of a different Valspar Championship. You have that longer rough to worry about, but also a ton of rain that has come through the area. So when you look at some of the scoring averages from last year, you can see there were rounds where it was like 1.4 over par, 1.2 over par out there for round 4. This is far from an easy golf course. If you go back to 2022, it's when it played a little bit easier than most years. Probably why they grew the rough out a little bit to try and combat some of the scores here. It can play under par, right? You can see round 3 it played a whole 1.36 under par, but that's as easy as it gets, right? We go back here to 2021, you'll see you have over par and under rounds mixed in. Back here to 2019 even, you can see it played over par for all 4 rounds. This isn't a golf course that's going to play 2 strokes under par every single round. So partially because of the added length of the rough, you see it with some extra spice out here the last 2 years, but the weather for round 1 is going to cooperate. So heading over to that side of things now, we've got Innisbrook brought up over here. You'll see that for Thursday, it's pretty clear, right? You've got a high of about 8, maybe 9 miles an hour of sustained wind, that coming towards the early half of the PM wave. Your temperatures are pretty mild all day. Now, maybe a little bit cool for the first hour and a half of play, but by the time they get to 9:30 a.m., it's going to be there in the high to mid 60s, and for the rest of the afternoon, they're in the mid 70s. So perfect temperature wise, pretty much no wind to speak of. So if this golf course is going to be gettable, it's going to be on Thursday. And if you haven't already looked at Friday and Saturday's forecast, it's calling for extremely windy conditions and also really wet conditions over the next 2 days. This is really going to be the best round of scoring that we get the whole week. So when we go to some of the scoring averages over here, I do think it'll play a little bit easier than maybe what we saw for all 4 rounds last year. So I think something easier than this half a stroke over par average, easier than this 0.55 over par scoring average, is pretty realistic. And if we go back here to 2021, I think that this is maybe the most comparable year in terms of scoring. I think something like this slightly under par scoring average, maybe even this slightly over par scoring average, are very realistic out here for next year. But what I've done for my Patreon peeps is something I'll be doing for all the rounds going forward here in 2024, is doing an extensive analytics breakdown. So we're going to go through this on here. It just makes it a little bit more simple to bring you guys some of the data for this golf course. And you'll see why a lot of my projections are what they are here, right? This will give you a lot of perspective for how I'm treating this golf course. And you'll see over here towards the end, we even have projected averages out there for Thursday. So we'll start at the top where we're looking at the 2023 stats. So this is just from last year when we had the longer rough. Your stroke average was 0.92 over par. This is a par 71, so that is 71.92 strokes. Your birdie or better average was slightly below 3 per round. Your bogey or worse average was slightly over 3.5 per round. So definitely a really low birdie average, right, compared to other tour events, and your bogey average was also extremely high. Your green regulation rate was 9.95 per round, one of the lowest that you'll see the entire year. And because there's only 13 fairways here, there are 5 par 3s on property. There was only a 7.11 fairway average. So all of these, again, significantly harder than what we're used to seeing. And this is probably the best comparison to what we're going to get this year because they did grow out the rough there in 2023. The last 3 years, so if we go out there and combine all of that data, you've got a scoring average of right about even par, right? 3/100ths of a stroke over par there, 71.03. Your birdie or better average was a little bit better, right? 3.25 per round. I say a little bit better, not a lot better, because it was only about a 0.27 difference, right, between the two sets of data. Your bogey or worse average did get better, right? It was almost a whole half a bogey better per round. Your green average was about half a green better per round, so also significantly higher. And your fairway average was about half a fairway higher per round as well. So again, the last 3 years, which includes rounds without that extra rough, look significantly better. But as you can see with this little footnote on here, a lot of that is because of the change of rough last year. Thursday's weather we already went through, right, looks pretty beautiful. So if we're looking at round one averages that I'm trying to calculate, I think we're going to see something between half a stroke under par and half a stroke over par. So that would put the scoring average between 70.5 and like 71.5 for the field. Your birdie average, I think, will be between 3 and 3.3. It'll be better than what we had for last year, but I don't think it's going to be better, right, than the last 3-year effective average. So I think that would be about a ceiling round out there for the birdie or better percentage, but a lot of that comes down to the pin locations. Bogey or worse, I think it'll be between 3 and 3.3. Your greens, I think, will be a little bit higher because of the receptive conditions out there. So I've got that between 10 and 10.5, probably closer to the 10.5 mark. And then your fairway average, I have between 7 and 7.5. Once again, with soft conditions, I do think it's going to be a little bit higher to start this year, but I'm not sure it's going to be all that much higher, right? Fairway percentage isn't quite as impacted as green regulation averages when we have these softer conditions, but you will see a slight little advantage to playing on those kind of soft fairways. In terms of your elite tier players, I also posted what like the top 25th percentile type of guys will be doing. I've got them about a stroke better per round, so between like 1.5 to 0.5 under par. Your birdie average, right, closer to like 3.5, 4 per round. Your elite tier guys are probably only making like 2.5 to 3 bogeys per round. You get the idea, right? Just slightly better across the board. Your top 25%, right, are usually about like a birdie better per round. Usually like half a birdie to a bogey better per round, right? There's those kind of adjustments that you have to make for your top end players, and that'll give you a good idea of how I'm handling over there for my exposure. So in general, you can see the underdog consensus is that the board is probably a little bit too optimistic, which will give us a good idea for the types of plays to look at later on. So starting with underdog, we've got first off an under and Brian Harman birdies at 4.5 birdies, and then an over, so they're not all fades over here in underdog. In fact, there are actually quite a few plays I would take for positive stances. It's just that the fades are more obvious over there on that side, and because we mix in a fade over here with a positive stance, we get a slightly better payout than we otherwise would, right? I mean, we have a 0.9x multiplier in here, which is kind of ding our payout a little bit, but because we do anti-correlate it, we get a slightly better outcome at a 2.8x. So these are two props that I like, and let's look at the Brian Harman one, right? If we got him at 4.5 birdies, he's a good player in this field, right? He's an elite tier player in this kind of field, major champion, multiple winner on the PGA Tour, but he's not known for birdie production. He's always a top 5 player in terms of bogey avoidance, but in terms of actual birdie or better percentage, he's usually capped off at the best at like 50-60 on the PGA Tour. So better than your average player in this field, don't get me wrong, right? Brian Harman is an elite tier player, but it's more so about his ability to avoid the big mistake than it is his production going out there and making 6-7 birdies. So at 4.5, even with that multiplier at 0.9x, was somebody I took for an under. And if we look for a comparison over here on the FanDuel side, you'll see that they have Brian Harman at minus 175 towards the under on FanDuel. So obviously a huge lean towards that in terms of the juice there, and a prop that I look like taking with some of that inherent line value. Next up, we also had the Taylor Moore over 9.5 greens regulation. If I think that the field average, right, is going to be something like 10 to 10.5 per round, right, probably closer to that 10.5 mark because of how soft the greens are. Well, Taylor Moore, who's been a gainer to the field of late in terms of his approach play, he's also a top 30 player in the PGA Tour this year when it comes to green and regulation percentage, a top 10 player in this field in that category, in fact. He'd have to project at least at that field average, right? So if it's 10.5, he's at 9.5 for a projection on underdog. There's a whole green value there. And then when you consider that he's playing well heading in, he won this event last year, which has to count for something. He went over this projection in all 4 rounds last year. You have to think that he'd project well over. So those are 2 props I'm taking there. There are a lot of others props that I'm considering that I've already posted over there on my Patreon page. So make sure to check that out for all the exposure I'm getting to. But that should give you a good idea, right? They've got other guys on here that are playing really well in terms of their shots gained approach or really good green and regulation percentage guys projected at like 10.5 greens, right? And if I think that's going to be the average for the field, there are some overs on greens that I like, and a few other guys at 4.5 birdies that I maybe am not so sold on for overs, right? Maybe that I'm taking for an under like we have here with Brian Harman. So make sure to check that out if you haven't seen already. You can probably use some of that data, some of that thinking to go out there and make your own plays. But if you want to know exactly what I'm taking, you guys know where to find it over there on Patreon. For our prize picks plays, we're going to go with 2 overs over here on the birdie better side. So we've got Keith Mitchell at 3.5, and I am pairing him up with Sepp Straka at 3.5 birdies. First off, both have morning tee times, which I think will be slightly advantageous out there for round 1. They also have late morning tee times. So what that's going to lead to is them having a tee time that's slightly warmer, right, compared to the guys going off at like 7:30 a.m. And if we compare it over here to FanDuel, where they do have odds up here for Sepp Straka, he is minus 175 towards the over, right? So the opposite, right? It was minus 175 towards the under with Brian Harman. Now it is that same type of juice towards the over with Sepp Straka. Straka's been playing okay of late. He hasn't been fantastic over there with his form, but he's played decently at this course before. He is a high birdie percentage player compared to the rest of the field. And then Keith Mitchell is in some of the best form in the world. So if they have Straka at minus 175, I think Keith Mitchell is an even better play out there at that 3.5 mark. So I'd probably have him closer to the minus 200 or even more juice. So you're getting a lot of line value there. You're only getting a 2.75x payout. So actually a little bit worse than what we're getting over here on the underdog side. But with all of that inherent juice that we're locking in, it's probably worth taking from that perspective. So those are 2 props I'm taking over there. There are a few unders on strokes that I'm taking too, because in general, the Prize Picks board's a little bit higher, right? Most players in comparison are 0.5 to even an entire stroke higher over there on the Prize Picks side. So while my underdog consensus, right, was that the board was maybe a little bit too optimistic, in a lot of cases, the Prize Picks board is a little bit more adequate, right? And if you take a look at their green regulation and fairway stuff, I actually think that Prize Picks is getting a little bit too optimistic there. So it's all dependent on the category that we're looking at. So that's what I mentioned off the bat with like the different boards are priced differently, which is great, right? When we have that variation from site to site, it gives us spots of value, right? It gives us places to go out there and extract a little bit of line value, and that's how we can go out there and have ourselves a profitable slate. So it's very data-driven, right, the process that I'm using. And if you're somebody that's playing the DK Pick 6 format, right, a lot of this data will be helpful for that. And that's the reason I'm going out there and putting it in this kind of format. It'll give you guys perspective on why I'm entering stuff. It'll give you guys data to use for your own sort of analysis. So whether you're, following my Patreon to go out there and just, see my plays, tail them, all that, there's quite a few people that do that. I think it's just as valuable to be in there to look at some of this data and to use it for your own process. So check it out if that's something that you're looking for. It won't just be for round 1 that I'm doing this. It'll be for every single round for the rest of the year. So it'll be a little bit less detailed round to round because we'll just be looking at the previous round's data, but it'll still be a full deep dive, right? Projections for the round ahead, look at the weather, all of that. Pin locations as well, right? To give you guys that added benefit to go out there and get your process started for the next day of action. That's all I've got here for the video though. Hopefully you guys feel a little bit more prepared to go out there and build some of your lineups, some of your slips out there on that end. Best of luck with your underdog slips, prize picks, whatever exposure you're getting to, and let's go out there and crush it Thursday. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already so you don't miss any of these previews to come. I'll be going live tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern time. You can throw any prop questions you have down in there. And then, of course, for rounds 2 through 4, I'll also be going live, covering all the action for Friday through Sunday. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss those and all the prop content to come. Should be a great week. Really looking forward to doing some of these deep dives for you guys. And let's go out there and have a 2024.